Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
The Education Corner podcast is so excited to welcome Mr. Adam Pettitt, head at Highgate School, North London. He speaks about the entry points and values at Highgate School, as well as their specialist pastoral care, partnerships, their work towards becoming a more environmentally sustainable school, and the bursary schemes available to students. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. To start with, could you tell us a little more about your personal background and what led you to your role as head at Highgate School?
Yes, it's a pleasure to be on the podcast with you as well. So my name, as you say, is Adam. I've been at Highgate School since 2006. Before then, I've worked in a number of schools. I was educated in the comprehensive school in Sussex. My father had an absolute loathing of school teachers as a mass, even though he'd married one, and had been very unhappy in his private school. So he would have been chortling. Sadly, he's no longer with us. And the idea that I've become a teacher, or indeed that I'm now running a private school. I read modern languages at university. I fell into teaching. Found that I really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the company of young people. I liked the excitement of teaching something that people understood and were excited by themselves. I started off teaching at Eton, which people say we were overpaid and overworked, which is probably pretty close to the truth at the time. That's what it felt like. I went on to be head of German at Oundle School, which was great fun, particularly as German had really taken off, and it involved taking young people to former East Germany and discovering the two Germanys as they grew together. I then went to Abingdon School as a head of modern languages. Again, great fun. Principally noted, I have to say, for meeting my wife, who was learning how to teach at the time. And then very happily on to Norwich School, where I was second master with deputy head pastoral, we call it nowadays. And then, on to London, not a place I'd ever expected to come to work in. I thought that I liked quiet country, rural places, or indeed some cathedral schools, but it turned out that the London metropolis was for me.
Fantastic. What a range of schools you've worked at. And just thinking about Highgate in particular, would you like to tell me a little bit more about the main entry points to Highgate School?
So, it's three schools in one. So we have a pre-prep, junior school and senior school. Children start if they come to the pre-prep, they start in reception. There are three-form entry aged 4. And then there's another entry at 7+ into year 3 in the junior school. About 60%, just over, of our pupils transfer from year 6 into year 7 in the senior school. And obviously there's another point therefore at 11+ into then. And we don't have any other entry point apart from occasional places, which we do run every year until the 6th form. And then we have a 16+ entry point for people wanting to transfer into our school at that point.
So really it's a 3 school and plenty of opportunity for parents if they're considering a move to consider you. Could you tell us a little bit more about the values and ethos at Highgate?
That's a fascinating question. I'm attending a heads conference at the moment. We just had a brilliant session on leadership, or the ethical dimension to leadership. And one of the speakers pointed out that all schools tend to say the same things, and you sort of want them to, because children need to be safe and happy and enjoy the one childhood they had. But the speaker suggested that, what would pupils say? If they say things about your values, then you're pretty sure that those are there, because obviously they've got limited interest in listening to adults tell them what their values of the school are. But I was thinking about this, and I think our young people would say, insofar as they would be interested in answering the question, what our values are is do what you love and you're good at. Exams are incidental. They may be an important learning experience, but how you travel to a destination is important. We call that, in sort of grown-up boring speak, a place for learning and scholarship. The idea that you arrive as a dependent child, needing adults to help you, but you want to leave having acquired the skills to secure your own academic and employment aims through your own efforts, and you set your own agenda. I think the children would then also say serving others rather than your own interest is a rewarding and a fulfilling way to lead your life, whatever your age. We're a well-resourced school, we're an advantaged school, and we have an obligation and an ability to contribute to other people's learning outside our school or outside our community. And we, as it were, in grown-up speak, would call that being a reflective community. So taking the idea that a community is much different from a service provider. You really have to feel that there's a cost to being a member of it, and that cost needs to be paid in full, which means that we need to see the impact that we as individuals, and therefore grossed up as a community, can make to others. And the third one is that we all need balance in our lives. So what you do beyond work or beyond the classroom really does matter. If that's how you're going to make and sustain friendships. And if parents had the opportunity to gift happiness to their children, they would, but actually they can't do that. But where they can help, as teachers can, is provide ways young people can spend time together so that they then do find friendship that counteracts the virtual world and creates a sort of lifelong ability to meet new people and to be interested in who people are, regardless of where they come from or what their background is, taking an interest in what their background is so they want to hear their own stories. And we call that being an exemplar for the healthy life, probably it's the hook on which we hang those series of ideas. So I think, broadly speaking, those are our three values. They'll resonate with a lot of people because they are things that I think are important for all young people. But I suppose the argot we use, the vernacular we use to describe them probably does help them get anchored in practice, in what we actually try to do day by day.
And all of it obviously feeds through to personal statements, university, and then life beyond, doesn't it?
It does. Although we do try to say, if you say too often, it'll look good on your UCAS statement, then you're probably chasing the wrong thing. Your UCAS statement should write itself because of the way you're beginning to choose to lead your life. And I think clearly there's an element of formula which goes with writing anything which is 4,000 characters long and has to fulfill a certain number of requirements. But you sort of hope that by the time people are thinking about what it is they're going to spend the next 3 or 4 years doing, that there's a sort of purpose and a desire behind it, which is going to mean the writing of it. It doesn't require them to magic up experiences. And indeed, I actually think that the drive amongst the more affluent to secure lots and lots of experiences sometimes can get in the way of what it is you can write that is genuine and that is authentic. And I do worry that we might go down the American route of having to turn our straightforward 16, 17-year-olds into Nobel Prize winners before they're really ready for it, because they are just young people who need to be able to write about their hopes and aspirations and perhaps deduce some sort of useful experiences. But if you come from a less advantaged background, that is so much more difficult to achieve. Well, it's either going to be driven by ChatGPT and everybody's going to write the same thing, or indeed we're just going to create impossible models for young people to aspire to.
We understand, really following on from that Highgate does a lot of partnership work, something that the magazine is always very interested in, because we try to reach out to families from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And you work especially closely with the Academy of Excellence in Tottenham. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with them and how the partnership benefits both your pupils and the pupils at the Academy of Excellence?
Yes, of course. The London Academy of Excellence is right next door to Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. It's about 3.5, 4 miles away from us at the other end of a long and stretchy borough. So we're one end of Haringey and Tottenham is at the other end. Until 2016, only 1% of young people who took their A-levels in that part of the borough were progressing to Russell Group universities. So young people, aspirational people, were leaving the borough and going elsewhere. And so there was a sort of a real sense that something needed to be done. And we'd been a player in the partnership area for quite a long time. So we were invited in by the schools commissioner, by local council and others to say, was there an opportunity for partnership to be able to help create an academically focused local school for young people in Tottenham so that they would be able to go to school somewhere and indeed associate Tottenham as a brilliant place to live, work and to study and to grow up. And we took on that challenge very happily. And we're now, while we are the older school and they are indeed the younger school, they are the Sunday Times Sixth Form School Year 2020. They are a high achieving, very ambitious school with just under 700 students, 60% of whom are going to Russell Group universities. We're also an academically selective and high achieving school, but we're both of us pretty bubbled communities. Our pupils, young people do tend to live and socialize through their schools, and we're at one end of the borough and they're at the other. And so the head and I both believe that the opportunity to meet and to experience what is in common and what is different and to think about the kind of issues that schools have faced, for example, CAGs and tags, teacher assessed grades and so on, and COVID, or indeed the changing face of university education is better done together. On a practical basis, what we've been doing is seconding teachers over the last 5 years, because the school is now just entering its 6th year. So we second a full-time equivalent of 9 teachers from Highgate, and that has a practical effect on their budget. State school funding for sixth forms is pretty close to the margins of what will work, and it means that there are effectively no provision for libraries, for extracurricular activities, for welfare, a whole series of things that they can't have, and indeed a certain number of subjects which, if they're not the right numbers, you can't run. So no art, no music, no theatre studies, unless you manage to recruit sufficiently well. So while you can have all the major players you'd expect to have there, all the STEM subjects, for example, you are really saying that bright young people from disadvantaged backgrounds may not have the full experience, whereas at GCSE they are doing those subjects. And so that means that they have got obviously a group of teachers who are being shared across 2 schools, which is brilliant for the cross-fertilization of ideas and gives my teachers a huge experience that they wouldn't otherwise have. And teaching only sixth form is not something you do in 11 to 18 school. We've got a reverse secondment this year for a teacher from LET who's giving her a chance to teach at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. So all sorts of benefits. But in terms of what the young people have, I think we're reaching a point where the relationships don't feel performative and don't feel just that one school saying it would be good for you people to meet and for young people, because there's nothing worse for young people to be told by adults that it's going to be good for them. I mean, even if it is, and to be told to socialize in that way. But there's a seriousness and a purposefulness which comes from young people meeting young people from another institution to do something together. So they've focused on how tackling sexual violence, tackling racism, looking at the gap in provision between state schools and independent schools, and most recently looking at leadership and what it means for young people. And they've organised conferences that have been student-led, and they've developed relationships and understanding across the schools. And obviously not everybody meets everybody, and not everybody creates a friendship, but there are young people now who have, I think, really quite sustained friendships and partnerships. And that's not only in those areas, but in drama, for example, has been a brilliant area, and music is now getting off the ground, where they are got things in common, but are excited about their differences. And I suppose the young people are probably leaving school from both schools more equipped with meeting people they don't have to meet, so that when they do go to university or the world of work, they are conscious that if you're using a sort of a series of institutional slang or things that you all got in common, you're pretty tedious to other people who don't know you. So how can you render yourself interesting and open to other people who may have something in common, age, but otherwise won't know the way that your school works? And I think the young people are really excited about that. And we've tried to, as teachers, sort of step back and allow those things to grow, but facilitate it on the boring level of, how can you meet and how can you get to meet each other and what things are likely to work and what things are less likely to work. So I suppose in sum, I think it's clearly created is a brilliant school which has 2 words of Tottenham and excellence together, which young people hadn't seen before in the educational context. I think that they are obviously hugely proud of that. I'm a governor there, and I'm struck by the excitement and the pride that the young people take in their community and in their school. And I think that that rubs off on my students who, in a way, are not given perhaps to thinking that their school is something of which they should be proud. And they have affection for the individuals within it, but actually being proud of a private school, independent school, is perhaps in 21st century something that not all young people will do. And it's been interesting to have that model differently in both directions.
I imagine there's a lot of sharing of resources and facilities. And
I have to say that LET has got by far the superior quality accommodation. If you're next door to a very successful football club and they've done the building, it is beautiful and it is a fantastic and very thoughtfully designed set of buildings that they enjoy. I mean, their outdoor spaces aren't that good, as most sixth form specialist schools haven't got. But yes, I have to say it's more the sharing of people, support staff and teaching staff across the 2 schools, and the sharing of experience and practice that I think that we see. And we have another and separate strand, which is called our Chrysalis programme, which is in the western part of the borough, where we work with 50 different schools across several boroughs, where indeed part of it is people, part of it is teacher training, part of it is enrichment, and indeed part of it is sharing facilities, which we have, which they may not have or may not have access to. And interestingly, LET, at the core mission it has, is its own outreach through what it calls Chrysalis East into its feeder schools, the 11 to 16 schools, so that they can create more opportunities for young people to meet the threshold for GCSE, and that parents entering a primary school or a secondary school in Tottenham can see the progression all the way through to university entrance and indeed university. Whereas at the moment it's terribly sort of atomized and broken up. And if you're a parent of a 4-year-old, it's not clear at all, unless you've got your own experience of what the paths are going to be through to university, and that can seem really, really foggy. And so dispelling that fog and creating opportunities for those teachers, those trusted teachers, to be able to talk to parents about what's ahead of them, I think is a real strength of partnership across a much wider set of schools than just us and LET.
Sounds amazing. And tell me a little bit more, this is more specific to Highgate, about bursary schemes that you are able to offer.
So bursary is, for your listeners, is means-tested financial assistance for families who wouldn't be able to afford either all or part of the school fee, the tuition fee. And we have, for quite a long time, had bursaries available for children entering at 11 and at age 16, so 11 plus and 16 plus bursaries. And then 2 years ago, we launched a bursary scheme for young people entering our junior schools. So there are bursaries available age 7 going into our junior school. So we've got those 3 entry points where you can have a bursary. And we have a virtual head of bursaries, so that not only the bursary youngsters join the school and join all the normal pastoral as you expect, going to a form, having a house and so on, but we also have somebody who looks at their experience, because grossed up across the 95 or so pupils, their experience is a really important and rich set of learning about how we can do better, how we can make sure that it's the school that is adapting to their differences and their needs, to make sure that the school can jettison things which, perhaps are there for tradition but aren't helpful, hang on to the things which are helpful, and facilitate navigating a school which maybe feel very, very different. I mean, often will feel very different to the school that they have been to, or possibly the school that their parents or carers have been to. So that's been a great bit of learning, and came about really as a sort of 10-year review we launched on how successful were bursaries, because we knew that in terms of outcomes, A-levels and universities, we were seeing a lot of success, but we felt that we weren't doing enough to pick up families and children's experience as they were experiencing it going through the school. That bursary working group recommended that we should really be putting our finger on the pulse all the way through, so that we could use young people and their parents and carers' experience to inform policy decision-making provision. And we've come across that although we've done 110% bursaries, which are meant to cover some of the trips that are offered and uniforms and so on, but what about buses? What about transport and those kind of things, which will otherwise provide yet another barrier to young people feeling confident that they could take on the experience of being in a school on a bursary?
The core teaching philosophy, can you tell us a little bit more about that at Highgate School?
So what I'll say probably will be a little bit through the senior school perspective or the senior school prism, but I hope that it will reverberate well with pre-prep and the junior school, where I line match the principles of the two schools. So we try to make sure that what makes sense in one school makes sense in all three schools. A starting point is to say that any exam that you have will have a distorting effect on the way you wish to teach and what you wish to teach. So using exams, which tend to be the final point, I mean, it's in the nature of most exams that they're when you're about to leave school, as the destination point, is going to be unhelpful. So we say, well, let's put them to one side and decide what is it that you do really want to teach, and to ensure that your starting point, therefore, is the head of department's vision. So they are the custodian for what should be taught, and whether it's examined or not is neither here nor there. And this can liberate teachers to be saying, well, even with the constraints so there has to be constraints because you need some sort of organizational principles within a school. Otherwise, there would be chaos and competition, and between teachers, it could be quite exciting. I do remember one school telling me that, in the 1960s, that they'd actually written a timetable on the basis of who turned up on the first day, but we don't work like that now. But there should be that freedom there. And that has really embedded itself in certain kinds of thinking, such as, well, we call it IBAC, just the time when Mr. Gove introduced EBAC, which is a contested thing. I mean, it may be good, it may not be, but IBAC is this idea of independence, which is what you really want children to have developed, the sense that they will use the learning they've got to secure the agenda that they're excited with, how they want to lead their lives, through buzz, which means lessons should be exciting. It doesn't mean to say that they all have to be all singing or dancing, but there should be a sense that there is a moment, that there's a reason why you are together, and the alchemy between the relationship between teacher and pupils and between themselves, which is why I think, online learning, where it has its place, is less good. Aspiration, the idea that you want to be having hopes and having desires which you want to fulfill, but actually you have to articulate and decide what they are. And through collaboration, which used to be a dirty word, it used to be called cheating, but the idea that people should be working together and jointly, not only because that's been facilitated by online platforms and being able to talk to each other online in the evenings, but actually that is a very common and good way for young people to be able to share ideas, but also in sharing their ideas, be able to critique others, be able to make sure they do understand something. So that sense is a response to how exams can shut down, but you actually want to go deeper. And we ban people from talking about years 10 and 11 as being the GCSE years. Years 10 and 11 are when you are 14, 15, 16, which is a really exciting time in your life. And when you look back at it, well, you maybe remember doing some exams, you actually remember all sorts of exciting things, and you feel you can change the world. And really, the brain development, of course, we'll know, is doing exciting things to you. And the idea is that you don't, as it were, teach towards the GCSE and then worry about a step up. You're teaching a 4-year course that means that anybody you're teaching might be going to university to read your subject. And so you're on a sort of really exciting and upward trajectory, which is momentarily interrupted by GCSE exams, which have their worth in terms of the experience of doing something which is quite high stakes at that moment, surviving and coping with disappointment and failure and bouncing back from those things. And you really try to ensure that people, despite the fact they're invited in to think, what am I going to drop? You say, well, the whole of the curriculum has got to be exciting. The whole of the curriculum has got to be something which we find potentially exciting, because we want people to do what they're good at, but also to do what they love. And so one of the key things I spend my time doing is telling parents to stop opening the oven door early to sort of check whether the cake is rising. That sense saying, I want to know how well my child is doing. I want to know how well the GCSE results are this year. I want to know how well doing with Oxbridge or whatever it is. And say, look, stop doing that, because you're putting them on a sort of automated walkway to a set of outcomes that you're just doing because you love your children. You want to be sure they arrive somewhere successfully, but you're sort of shutting down what it is they might discover about themselves. And I sort of tell stories about my own children. My wife, I have 3 children. You need to sort of understand that I didn't turn out to be very successful at maths at school. I'm paid good money not to sing. And one of my children, wants to be an opera singer, and the other is reading maths at university. And I think that well done to Highgate. They really were sort of sense of saw something, and children were allowed to explore, but weren't allowed to shut themselves down or get themselves limited by what I was interested in. And I do think they are interested in what I'm interested in. They picked up on crosswords and old buildings and running and other bits and pieces, but they've forged their own worlds. And if I'd sort of imposed my own interest too early, I think, or, started to say, well, how well are you doing in X, Y, or Z subject, then I think I might have shut that down. So I think that's a really important thing. Academically selected schools are full of parents who are really anxious about whether their children are doing well enough. And so we try to say, look, once they're here, can you stop worrying about that and just take pleasure in whatever it is they're enthusiastic about? And we will do the rest. We also make sure that people do 4 A levels to counteract the idea that 3 is a good number, even though once upon a time it was. When I was at school, we did 3. 4 is a bad number. It's far too few, but at least it's better than 3. And we like people to choose things which don't necessarily line up. Not everybody needs to do 4 aligned subjects. To have complementary subjects there is a great thing to see. The greater diversity we see in the kinds of A levels young people are doing, either as individuals or as groups, the happier that we tend to be.
Fantastic. And do they all manage to take the 4 A levels?
So none of them have to take them through to year 13. It's starting off in year 12. And interestingly, a third of them, if they were asked to rank them 1 to 4, the 4th one becomes one of the 3 that they want to carry on with. And we try to get this idea that being scholarly is not the preserve of the particularly brainy, of whom there are always going to be a number, certain kind of very academically minded youngsters. But scholarliness is the means of working. It's a way of working, which means that you're taking responsibility for what you do. You are preparing so that you can contribute to lessons, and that you're not spending your time dependent. You, as quickly as you can, you're becoming a critique of and independent from your teachers, who will be more knowledgeable than you are and more experienced than you, so that you can then make your own decisions about how to go about studying, but equipped with the skills that you definitely need to have. So we don't want a sort of series of performing seals really in the school. You really want young people who are admirably and confidently able to tackle the things that they want to do, because they've got an idea about how they might align their skills and their energy to solve problems in the world that they see, in legion all around them.
Highgate School have embedded specialist services. I think this kind of follows on from what you've been saying to some level, such as well-being and safeguarding into your pastoral care, which is obviously something that every school is considering. But how do you feel it's unique at Highgate?
I don't think I'm going to claim that it's unique. I think I just wanted to reflect on, I know a lot of schools have absolutely been thinking about how can you bring in specialist wellbeing services other than just by commissioning them or using them when you need them, right into the heart of school, and indeed train professionals in safeguarding, inviting people out of social care into schools. And we're certainly not alone in doing that. Well, the catalyst for doing that was everyone's invited. And the sense that schools were overwhelmed by the experience of young people, but girls in particular, and the sense that the teachers, who I think have been earnestly and I think to a large extent successfully delivering pastoral care, but clearly things have gone undetected or unshared, or indeed sometimes it must have been ignored. And so I think there was a very sensible sense that these were issues which needed specialist help. So we have a director of wellbeing, so our second post holder, and she's a child and adolescent psychotherapist with long experience of working in schools, and our director of safeguarding, qualified social worker with very high level managerial experience and very used to directing services. And in one way, it's obvious that we have created greater capacity and greater understanding. But the challenge has been, I think this is interesting because we're probably on to sort of phase 2 of this, is developing in these specialists an understanding of what it is to work in a school. And working in a school is a very different environment for working in social care or working in well-being, because in both those cases, you normally have an ability to do things not at pace, to take time, to be able to convene meetings, to stop and to think carefully and to walk around a problem in its entirety, to be able to reflect really thoughtfully and to make sure that a particular child or a particular case is given all the time they need, and that there are no terms. In social care and in psychiatric interventions or well-being, you don't stop for a third of the year. nor do you have exams in the way which are going to prevent you from doing things. Whereas schools, obviously, it's in the nature of them, they're open, broadly speaking, 2/3 of the year. Parents and pupils and staff have other things that they want to get done. So everything is always, will it be done by the end of the week? Will it be done by the end of term? What about the exams that are coming up? And getting culturally both things to understand each other and to work out what is the best. So how can you get schools to pause and to slow down? And how can we get parents and teachers and carers to understand that once you have identified a problem correctly, it is likely, however well-resourced you are, that the solution may have repercussions that we haven't anticipated, but will also take quite a long time to deliver. Therapeutic interventions, counselling, and so on will take a long time. But that runs completely counter to what most staff and parents and pupils think, is that once we've identified a problem, we can probably pretty much resolve it for the next day. You have to be able to slow that down. And then at the same time, how can you get those who are skilled in safeguarding and well-being understand that what they're going to have to be able to deliver is going to be delivered in different ways in that context? And some of that means that certain aspects of what you do in well-being still need to be happening outside school. The director of wellbeing is not going to be your therapist for all your children, but is going to be looking at the strategy you have to be able to create better responses or to be able to have preventative measures. And the same with safeguarding. I mean, there's a lot of good practice that's been done and people actually overseeing the links with social care and making referrals outside of the school. But there's also thinking about what is the training, what is the understanding of the deeper issues which lead to safeguarding being so important, which if everybody is able to be trained in and understand and develop, will then mean that you're able to intervene earlier using the pastoral care. In other words, the people who really understand the children on a day-to-day basis, have the teacherly instincts of what can be done within a set of time. And so I think my reflection why I was interested in this is I feel that we're going through a really interesting period at the moment in schools of how you combine best, specialist services that sit outside schools, in schools, ensuring that schools learn from them and are able to use those, but without schools stopping being schools, which they do need to be. And I suppose that's what I'm finding intellectually challenging, but also really exciting at the moment.
That sounds fascinating. It's something you've already mentioned, really, and it's in the core of everything you're discussing, which is wonderful to hear. But pupil voice at Highgate, it's obviously something that's very, very important, both to you and the school. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I'd love to do so. I mean, you'll find that most schools, if they're emphasizing something, it's because they're responding. If you're getting out of bed to do something different and additional in a busy school, it's nearly always because you've identified something, either an opportunity or indeed a weakness. I pondered during the Everyone's Invited difficulties which hit most schools of the anger that young people were feeling and how they were articulating that. And how can we make it possible for that anger to become something positive and beyond all the important interventions and the work that all schools at that point did with external services? And I think it goes back a little bit to the difference between how young people at LET feel about their school and that sense of pride, the sense that it's their school and it's mostly about them. And schools like ours at Highgate, where increasingly, perhaps over the last 10 years, there's been quite a negative portrayal of independent schools in the press. I mean, not necessarily individually, or sometimes it has spun out like that, but you rarely open a newspaper or go on a website without the fact of somebody having been in a private school being mentioned, whatever happens to them, whether they've been in a tragic accident or whether they've been prison. It'll nearly always say alumnus of or former pupil of, privately educated, and then the fee. And so therefore it's almost a defining characteristic, and that if viewed dispassionately, that could be quite often a negative thing. You have only achieved what you've achieved because you have had a silver spoon in your mouth the entire time for education. You got good A-level grades, you went to a good university, but that's because the teaching was better. There's very little sense that these achievements are because of your own efforts, your own agency, and you're saddled with your parents' choices about the school you've gone to. Now, I'm sort of hyping it up a bit, but I did wonder whether there was an element of that. And, it's become impossible or more difficult for young people to feel proud about the schools they go to if they are either from an advantaged background or their school is very successful. And almost the more successful the school is in terms of its aggregate A-level grades, maybe the more difficult it is for the individual to feel that they have achieved it. You would achieve something, wouldn't you, kind of thing. One of the things that we did during Everyone's Invited is we had a lot of listening exercises where young people could explain their feelings, explain their experiences, and they could talk with either members of staff they trusted and they knew, or indeed with external voices. And it was very powerful to see that once the downloading of thoughts and emotions was there was a real desire to understand more in order to be able to influence decision-making. Not that we want young people to feel that they're responsible for running the school or running the world or all the difficulties are there, but that sense that if they've achieved sufficient understanding of the situation, they slow down their criticism of it or their sense that it could be done just by doing this, clicking. You speak to a 12-year-old and they think that if there's a problem over, I don't know, having to queue for the buses or something, that somebody somewhere can wave a magic wand, and it takes a bit of time to get to that point. But once you understand, it becomes quite exciting and empowering for young people to get involved. And so student voice for us was about both having opportunities to talk about everything and anything, such that if there is something that is significant you want to talk about in your life, that you know how to do it, you know where to do it. So that could be confidentially online, could be with somebody, that a teacher you go to trust, or it could be somebody of the wellbeing team, or it could be a senior member of staff. It could be me. I do Q&A sessions. I'm very sort of publicly around, hoping that to lunch my way through whole years of 10, 11, 12 and 13, and come in house groups. There's always going to be an opportunity, and it's not just me, but there are lots of opportunities. And the sense that, okay, so you've chosen to speak to me now. Where are we going to go with that? What are we going to say now? And then whether you're in the student council or whether you're on one of the committees that the young people have suggested to set up. So we have a wellbeing, inclusion, safeguarding, pastoral, that's such a mouthful. We call it WISP group, where they're able to critique what the school is saying or doing. For example, when it comes to, whether a PSHE lesson has landed well or badly and how it's gone. And they've got an opportunity to look at that and take it apart and then make suggestions. And so I think that with any luck, young people feel that if the school is a happier or a safer place, if there is a greater culture of people calling out sexist language or racist microaggressions, that it's because of their actions rather than because it's from the top, because that sort of sense from the top can feel very performative. You're just doing this because you want to sound good or you're worried. And if that then gets to the point where young people are feeling that about the school, then they begin to recognize, I think, and validate what in individuals, because they really do like their teachers. They really trust their teachers in the academic context. I think when they see them work in the pastoral context to try and improve things generally, they're more likely to believe that even if it doesn't go well, that it's well-intentioned, and therefore, sort of a joint endeavor, a sense of pride in what people are doing and what they're achieving becomes there. And so the child leaves feeling that they were actually really quite critical to the school being a happy place or a safe place, rather than that just being a given, because people think that schools are generally safe and happy places. Actually, they're not, unless you work really, really hard. It's really odd to think you've put lots of young people together that they aren't safe places. But actually, it's sort of, you only need to read Lord of the Flies to know how wrong it can go, how quickly it can go wrong. Golding sort of really saw that. But if children don't have the right models to fall, they've all got sort of I can't remember which of the bad characters is in Lord of the Flies. We've all got that inside
Jack and Ralph.
Exactly. Ralph, we've all got that inside us, and we need to be careful, and we need to see the right models, and we need to experience what it is to make the world a better place by our own efforts.
And I think it sounds like, from what you're trying to say, the students investing in that will give them kind of more investment in the school and kind of in the whole community that they are a part of.
Yeah, I think they internalize that that's a starting off point, that young people tend to belong to fewer communities than perhaps they did. And certainly that's the case in urban environments. So religious communities obviously have that, perhaps a bit more. We have quite a strong Jewish makeup in our schools, so we don't measure it particularly closely, but it certainly must be over 30% of our young people will be coming from Jewish communities, where actually the act of going to synagogue and that tradition of helping others, whether they are in your community elsewhere, is stronger. But beyond religious communities and possibly beyond sort of smaller villages and so on, there is that sense that what you actually belong to, that is your family, and then you go to school, but is that actually a community if it's something that's just provided for you? And so I think that sense of knowing what a community is, what it means you have to be as the individual for it to mean something. So you do have to turn up, you do have to commit, and the payback is huge, but only if you've been fully involved in that experience of, there's a house singing competition, and if not everybody turns up, then how dare you feel pleased your house has won if you didn't turn up, kind of thing. And then people go with feeling, oh gosh, I feel a bit low about that. I get that point. And I think that is in sort of 21st century London, certainly really important, particularly when you overlay that with, there are so many online communities, which really sort of, I think, muddle people's notion of, don't belong to the Scouts, don't belong to church groups, don't belong, whatever the group might have been. And I think, if anything, that the surge in interest in things like environmental sustainability and groups that achieve these things not only speaks to people's anxiety about those, but actually finding fellowship in things that you believe in, and people work with you and give you that support, I think is one of the learnings we're probably going to see over the next 10 to 15 years.
And what advice can you give to students and families of students who possibly are suffering from imposter syndrome and feelings of anxiety surrounding their abilities, in your case, in a selective school?
It's absolute to validate them. It's difficult to see how you can go through 4+, 7+, or 11+, or indeed 16+ entry without actually coming in and worrying whether you're bright enough, because you've spent a lot of time getting ready, and probably the talk around the kitchen table has been, how's your English going? How's your maths going? You're really setting yourself up to say, am I clever enough? And once you're there, you're thinking all these other people have gone through exactly the same process. And you need reassurance. If you apply to a selective school, if you're in a position to do so, and if you believe that's the right thing to you, you and your parents probably, there's quite a lot riding on this. And if you get in, there's a lot of praise and there's reflected glory. And we see that in LET, that the young people feel quite a pressure on them to live up to the word excellence. And at times this can be sort of quite debilitating unless it's sort of, owned. And so I think we should acknowledge it, and we should say it's entirely normal, but we shouldn't allow it then to become embedded in the way that we then look at the young people and how we watch their progress. So when I'm talking to parents of year 7, year 8, whatever, whichever year it is, but particularly in those first years, I say, look, you are all going to want to ask me about what the A-level results last year, because you want to be reassured that you've chosen the right school. And then you're going to ask me how well your children are doing, and you want to know where they sit in the year group, because you want to be reassured that they're going to do well in their A-levels. And I'm going to tell you that those are both wrong questions, and that we need to talk about, how your children are doing things which we can change. Are they getting well organized or sufficiently well organized to be able to make it lessons on time and do their homework in ways which are going to lead to the learning? Are they learning to be a little bit quieter if they're really noisy, or how do we get shy children to feel a sense of being able to involved without, as we're telling them they're wrong for being shy? All these little things which actually, you can really work on as a young person. If somebody says, be quiet a little bit in lesson, or try to arrive with a little bit more time to start the lesson, those are things which you can actually deal with. And those sort of preparation and transition and study skills are going to be really useful. And then just to take pleasure in what your children are enthusiastic about. Don't project your own anxieties. If you weren't good at a particular subject, don't keep inquiring about the other child just to be reassured that genetically you haven't, given them an inability to cope with sort of verb endings or something. Or indeed take such an interest in something that they realize that you are far more interested in X subject rather than Y. And therefore, if they happen to like Y subject more, that you're going to be letting them down. And a whole series of just, some fairly straightforward psychological approaches to make sure that the young people think that whatever they're doing at this school, you're going to be pleased when they are enjoying it. And, if that, broadly speaking, they're getting out of bed willingly to go to school, given, 14, 15, 16, nobody wants to get out of bed. But, broadly speaking, they want to jump out of bed and go to school, and it's a good thing. Then as a parent, you're probably going to read everything is okay, and you're just going to be intrigued by how they're doing. And if they need a little bit of support somewhere, or they need to be adapting something, it's not a sort of a cosmic problem. It's just if you're looking in your garden and you need to do a bit of weeding or whatever, you need to water a bit more, that's what you do. But you don't look at your tomato plant and think the world has come to an end because it hasn't got particularly nice tomatoes now. So real sense of unpicking what it is, but being aware that the young people will say, the older they get, the more aware they'll become of their ability relative to others. They've put themselves in a situation in a school where normally they're pretty ambitious. They probably do want to get the best grade they can. They're probably going to apply to university, which is going to be a real stretch for them because they're going to be ambitious. We put aspiration in our IBAC, then they're going to be. And so it's obviously going to be this tension there. But all along the way, the parents can develop this sense of that we are shock absorbers, we can release pressure, we can validate their concerns, but we're not going to intervene. We're going to allow them to inhabit this world, but we're going to make sure that our love for them, this unconditional love we have for them, is not somehow in the children's minds subject to how well they do in their exams. Doesn't mean to say that we don't go ecstatic when they get them, but we validate their concerns. We make it clear that we don't mind what happens other than if it matters to them. And I think that's what you have to really run counter to in these sort of quite driven societies, as London tends to be, or I expect Singapore, Hong Kong, New York, they've all got those places where, it's all a bit rat racy. And we as parents have to sort of, say, I'm sorry, that's how I behave at work, but let's hang back. That's not how you're going to have to lead your life. If you do something different or better than I've done, then that's just going to be great. So you sort of slightly subvert the anticipation of what being in a selective school is like.
Fantastic. And a final question. You're working on becoming increasingly environmentally sustainable. How are you also working to ease eco-anxiety in the pupils? Because obviously there's a lot of talk, and particularly in schools, it starts in the junior school, doesn't it, about climate change and recycling and things.
Yeah, there are so many anxiety-inducing sort of messages that can come out. Our youngest, I can remember, got really upset about koalas when he heard that the traffic pollution, they're too close, and as it were, and we didn't understand why he wasn't sleeping well for quite a prolonged period. Then we realized that it was this sense of no agency, but the story was being told in a particular way. So understanding how this can play out in young people, and I think all of us can feel that sometimes when you're seeing news account after news account of forest fires or floods taking place, you think, gosh, what is there? And then at the same time, you come across and you think about why are so many people driving, and why are so many people flying to places that they could be flying to? This is human nature and its richness, isn't it? Sort of the contradictory, oppositional nature of these things. Well, I suppose what we've tried to do, again, like most other schools, we've decided that from being something which we felt we needed to have on our development plan, because if we didn't put it in a development plan, we knew we wouldn't do it. Because a development plan is about things that won't be achieved unless there's corporate communal effort to make the main thing, as it were, before you can actually achieve it. So we've been thinking about this for quite a long time. And I think we've sort of run into a brick wall several times in working out how can we manage it. And I think the best things that we did was write a sort of 10-point plan, which promised to hold ourselves to it. And we got the aid of those who understand organizations about the things we should be saying. And we realized that we were going to have to do a lot of measuring of the energy we actually use. And we're going to have to put it at governor level to make sure that the governors were hearing about it, and we've got an executive committee and then a pupils committee. And then we realized quite how difficult it was going to be to do it, because our site is really complex. There are all the different boilers have different meters on them. Some of them don't have any meters at all. It was going to be a real headache to do it. But actually just seeing how complicated something straightforward should be has really helped us say, well, just because it's complicated doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be trying to do it all the time, even if it's going to take a long time. And then we realized beyond the infrastructure things we need to be doing, we needed to raise environmental sustainability consciousness amongst pupils and staff, which has led to brilliant standoffs from people. Am I allowed to take a plane to go to Uganda in order to do some community work or not? Is it okay to go on a long haul trip for sport or not? And so you have pupils now, because they're involved, writing to me to say it is outrageous that there's a group going to be doing X, and other people saying, I've been looking forward to doing this for years. Those planes are going to take off anyway, so why shouldn't I be in there? And I think sort of bringing these things and realizing that this is really complex stuff. This is, on one hand, I suppose it's sort of, wanting to be selfish for your own children so they can achieve those experiences against the dangers of performative actions on the half, and actually throwing it all in and realizing quite how painful and quite how difficult this is, and really owning the difficulty there has been part of it. So it hasn't been smooth, it isn't smooth, and it isn't easy. But on the other hand, it's something that we are now talking about, not because we sort of, you just got to talk about sustainability, but because it's a really hot issue for us all. We have a sustainability lead who's been probably the cheeriest person in the whole school, giving us, as it were, indications of how we can make differences locally. Got a head of environmental curriculum who's explaining to us what we are actually doing and mapping it. And so we're talking about the opportunities in the curriculum, but also at the fringes of the curriculum to nudge people to be thinking differently. We've been doing training on carbon literacy. We have climate cafes where the staff can actually go and talk and chat about these things, share their interests, where you quite quickly do get a sense of how close people are to this and how supportive they are and how they can be nudged into being more supportive. I mean, it's akin, I would have said, to dealing with racism sort of 50 years ago, that the Race Relations Act in the 70s changed what people were expected to do, but actually changing values. I think that now we're actually beginning to see that the moral dimension of sustainability is now beginning to get purchased, but it's actually impacting on the way we're actually leading our lives. And people are being made to feel that maybe it is immoral to be taking certain actions. And that's a really uncomfortable position to be in. In terms of what I've been trying to explain is using the experiences we get, the feedback we get, to start to put questions out to parents and to young people and to staff to see whether people respond well. And the question I put most recently is it not the case that we're going to actually have to tell our young people that they're going to have to live more simply, that the things that the parents, teachers have been able to do, they won't be able to do? And just because you can do something or because you can afford to do something is no longer going to be a reason that you can do it, that you will do it. And there's going to be a really moral dimension, a very pragmatic level about where you're leading your life. And I think getting debate at that level is going to be really important, but always trying to hang back from sounding as though you just want to be performative and you want to make your own school look better than another school. It's just your obligation to others. And the eco-anxiety, I think, is a really interesting one. I think we have to be able to show young people what they are able to achieve and to indicate that though there is the impact of, a cumulative aggregate impact of our not doing things, there is also extraordinary capacity for them to do things as well. And I think the sort of joke in the pack is artificial intelligence and the opportunity for us to be able to find technological and other answers, which we have not yet found. But that mustn't become a reason for not doing the things which we can already do. And that's a tough one to explain. But just because something's hard doesn't mean you don't want to do it. And actually having things to do which young people can see are inherently difficult to do, I think gives them a greater sort of sense of respect for what professionals do. And it helps them get excited about the decision making that they'll be going on. And debate is good. So it's exciting, if difficult.
It's challenging. An absolutely fascinating interview. And I'm so glad that we've been able to highlight some of the incredible schemes and work and innovations that are taking place at Highgate School. So thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much indeed for inviting me on.